because now I could actually have my thing there. You ready, Larry?
Yep.
All right. So backed by popular demand, Annie Little. Annie is, for the past 23 years, has worked as a wildlife biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Recently, she transferred to the National Park Service. And since 2002, she's been a lead avian biologist. I don't know what that means. Maybe.
Bird biologist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Learn something different every day. For the Montrose Settlements Restoration Program, in this role, she oversees the seabird restoration projects on the California Islands and the reintroduction of the bald eagle to the Channel Islands. Annie's focus is conservation of unique island ecosystems, including eradication control of invasive species, biosecurity, habitat restoration. I'm telling you, you're the perfect person for Ormond Beach. We're gonna recruit you for that. Annie is the U.S. coordinator for the Trilateral Island Initiative, which promotes island conservation and collaboration among partners in Canada, U.S., and Mexico. Annie is stationed at Channel Islands National Park in Ventura, California. She graduated from the University of California, San Diego, with a BS in Biology, Ecology, Behavior, and Evolution. So, I think your second or third time here?
Second.
Second time?
Yeah.
So, yes, we really enjoy having Annie here. With that, I'll
Okay.
Annie take it over.
Okay, thank you guys for coming today on a Saturday. I know it's hard to come to talks on a Saturday when you could be at the beach. But today I'm going to be talking about a project on San Nicolas Island. And it's one of our seabird restoration projects. Can everybody hear fine? Okay.
Yeah.
There are more seats up front if you can't see very well. So the Channel Islands, we see them every day off our coast. There's 8 of them. 5 of them are in the national park, Santa Barbara, and then the 4 northern islands. And then we have the 3 southern islands, San Nicolas and San Clemente, that are owned by the U.S. Navy, and then the Santa Catalina Island, which is owned by the Catalina Island Conservancy. And today we're going to be focused on a project on San Nicolas Island. And San Nic, for those who haven't been there, it's primarily used as a radar facility. They do a lot of launches off the island, but it's mostly a communication hub. There's not as much on the ground training like there is on San Clemente. But it's a very important island for natural resources as well. And we worked with the Navy and other partners to remove feral cats from the island. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. But before I jump into that project, I wanted to talk about islands in general and some of the threats that we see to islands. Fortunately, on our islands here, they're mostly protected. We have the National Park Service and the Navy managing our islands. And there's not a lot of development, but in general, habitat loss and alteration is an impact for islands worldwide. Climate change, we're seeing changing conditions on islands. Ocean acidification is happening around our islands as a result of increasing water temperatures, and that results in impacts to the marine environment. We have, not so much on our islands again, but harvesting. In other places, they harvest seabird eggs and other island resources. Tourism, invasive species, that's a big one that I'll be talking about today, and the focus of our talk is the impact of invasive species, meaning a species that was either introduced to the island or accidentally introduced and does not belong there, is non-native to that location. And because islands are isolated and they have unique evolution, you tend to find a lot of species that are only found on islands. So when you introduce a non-native predator, for example, that can have tremendous impact to species that are only found on that particular island. This is the Laysan albatross, and there's a small colony of Laysan albatross on Guadalupe Island in Mexico, just down the coast here. And this is the impact of a feral cat in the Laysan albatross colony just over one night. So a feral cat, couple individuals can can have this kind of impact to adult nesting birds. And Laysan albatross are very long-lived birds. And so you can have, without protection of a particular colony, you can have really tremendous negative impacts from invasive species. And then finally, marine pollution. And in our area, we have a really unique situation in that we, off the Palos Verdes Peninsula, for over 30 years, there was a large amount of DDT, which is a pesticide, was dumped. All the byproduct waste were dumped into the ocean off of the Palos Verdes Peninsula here at White Point. And let's see, maybe there's more here. An additional 500 metric tons was dumped at sea off of Catalina Island. And the result of that was the contamination spread throughout the whole marine ecosystem in our area. Basically, the contamination came into the system, settled in the muds off of the Palos Verdes shelf, and then was uptaken through benthic invertebrates like worms and mollusks, and then up through the food web. And so species that are at the very top of the food web, like bald eagles, seabirds, peregrine falcons, they sustain the most impact from these chemicals because it biomagnifies through the food chain. So the species at the top of the food chain get the most concentration of these chemicals. So there was a lot of results that we saw from that. Yeah.
Why is that? It's just kind of counterintuitive. It seems like it would be the reverse.
That they would have the most.
Yes.
Well, it's just because these guys, are eating the worms, right? And so these are contaminated. Then these guys are contaminated, and then the birds will eat these and then these. So as it moves up, they get just increased contamination. And like marine mammals, they tend to have a lot of contamination that stays in their blubber. So when a bald eagle eats the contaminated marine mammal carcass, for example, they can get a huge dose of contamination just from one feeding, for example. So it just has the effect of, because they get it from so many different sources at the top of the food chain. So as a result of that, the contamination scientists were documenting all sorts of impacts on the Channel Islands. Bald eagles disappeared from the islands, peregrine falcons disappeared. We were seeing complete collapse of brown pelican colonies out there. They just couldn't reproduce in the late 1960s. And as a result of that, the state and federal governments brought lawsuit against the main culprit of Montrose Chemical Corporation, who's the one dumping all this contamination. And 10 years later, there was a settlement reached, and a $30 million fund was established to try and restore some of these resources that were impacted from the DDT contamination. And so this project, the San Mick project, is one of those. And last time I was here, I talked about the bald eagle reintroduction program. We also had a program for peregrine falcons. We have several seabird habitat restoration projects on several of the islands. And then we have our removal of feral cats, which I'll talk about. And then finally, we had a project for seabirds on the Baja California Islands in Mexico, trying to restore their populations as well. So just to give some context about where the funding came for this project. This project, we started planning for the project in 2004, and it actually, these kinds of projects are very complex and challenging to plan. It took about 5 years during the planning process before we actually began the project in 2009. So, as I mentioned, the removal of invasives is just a significant effort to try and restore islands. And this project, just in context of all the other invasive work on the Channel Islands, we meaning collectively the managers of the islands, the Park Service and the Navy and others, have removed a lot of invasives from the Channel Islands. We're not done yet. There are still rats on San Miguel Island. There's cats and rats on San Clemente Island. There's still pockets and a whole suite of species on Catalina still. But there has been a tremendous effort to try and remove invasives from the Channel Islands. and most recently, actually even moving to look at things like invertebrates like Argentine ants, which can really disrupt a whole community at sort of the base level. So that's a project that's currently ongoing. So the project goal was to remove feral cats in order to restore and protect seabirds and other native fauna. San Nicolas Island is about 14,000 acres in size, and it is home to a variety of nesting seabirds, and also it's one of the largest marine mammal rookeries in our area. San Nicolas Island and San Miguel Island host hundreds of thousands of marine mammals, from elephant seals to California sea lions and harbor seals. So San Nic has a lot of resources, and in our area, islands are the nesting place for seabirds. With all the coastal development, there's really not areas that are disturbance-free for seabirds. So the islands are particularly important, and over 90% of the seabirds nest on the Channel Islands. So this project really was aimed to try and remove invasive species that was impacting seabirds. Some of the target seabirds, sometimes are considered, nuisance birds. Western gulls, you see them here. There are other gulls on the mainland, but Western gulls actually, they're fairly restricted in their nesting distribution, and there's really actually not that many of them, and the Channel Islands are a very significant nesting area for Western gulls. So Western gulls is one of the target species. Brandt's cormorants. San Nicolas Island is home to one of the largest Brandt cormorant colony. These are pelagic seabirds, and San Nicolas is very important for these guys. California brown pelicans. This species doesn't nest on San Nicolas Island, but it's important for roosting and just as a stopover for these guys. California brown pelican. Western snowy plover. This is a species you guys might be familiar with here on our local beaches. This is a federally threatened species, and San Nicolas Island has a few nesting pairs out there. The problem with these guys and San Nic is they really compete with the marine mammals for habitat on the beach. So with all the marine mammals, the snowy plovers don't really have a lot of room, and with the increasing numbers of the population of marine mammals increasing, these guys are kind of getting crowded out. And when you're dealing with several 1,000-pound animal and you have a little snowy plover nest, there's really no, these guys don't really have a chance on some of these beaches. But this is still an important species that the Navy tries to manage for out there. And then also the San Nicolas Island fox. So you guys are probably familiar with the island fox on the islands. It's on 6 of the 8 islands. And each of the islands where the fox is found has its own subspecies. So they're each genetically distinct from the other islands. So this guy competes with the feral cat for food and territory and habitat. So this was another one of our target species for the project. And then an island night lizard, just another. This species used to be federally endangered on the island. It's endemic, meaning it's only found on this island, this unique subspecies found on San Nicolas and actually on Santa Barbara Island too. Just another rare species that was being impacted by feral cats. So cats, as I showed that picture earlier in Guadalupe Island, for those of you that have cats, maybe outdoor cats, you know that cats are very efficient predators. They can eat a variety of different things. So they're very much a threat to global biodiversity on islands. And even on the mainland, feral cats or even household cats are a major cause of decline of terrestrial birds. And they're just extremely efficient, smart, and they have had a significant role in the extinctions of many species on islands. And the removal of feral cats from islands is a well-established technique. It's been done across over 65 islands worldwide, and we have adapted and learned from other projects before working out here on San Nic. And then, oops, sorry, cats on the California islands. So in the California islands can range, we have, for the purpose of this figure, it's basically from the Channel Islands down into Mexico. Cats used to be present on all the islands. And today, now we just have cats remaining on Catalina, San Clemente, Guadalupe Island, which currently they're trying to remove. There's a large-scale program right now to remove them. Cedros Island. So out of the 16 islands of this group, we have cats remaining on 4 of them. So cats on San Nicolas Island were established by the 1950s. As I mentioned, they prey upon a variety of native fauna, from the endemic deer mouse that's out there to lizards to seabirds, and they compete with island fox. The Navy began control of cats in the 1980s just to try and protect some of these sensitive resources. But without really a large-scale effort, control doesn't really work. You can kind of knock back the population, but really when you're trying to look at doing a major conservation effort like this, the goal is complete removal, eradication of the species. So as I mentioned, we started planning in 2004. We conducted a feasibility study a couple years later, and then we put out a draft. There's a whole process to implementing these types of projects under the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. Some of you may be familiar with it. We released a draft environmental assessment. And some of the actions that are normally used in feral cat projects worldwide were not available here because we had the presence of the island fox. For example, poison. You wouldn't want to use poison out on the island with the presence of the island fox because there's too much risk and potential to impact. So we did, within the scope of NEPA, you're obligated to evaluate a whole range of alternatives to figure out what would be the best, most effective and least environmentally damaging. So these were our proposed actions to use these padded leg hold traps. This is one of our trappers that, these are a little bit different because cats on these islands are so feral. You can't trap them with traditional methods like you might try and do in a feral cat colony on the mainland, where they might go into like have a heart box trap or something like this. These cats are truly feral and are not going to. So you place these traps in the ground, and it's really like a intersection of art and science almost, because these guys are so skilled at trying to make it so that the cat steps directly into the trap, and then the trap holds the foot until you're able to go retrieve the animal. So we had proposed leg hold traps, also using hunting with tracking dogs, and our original proposal was to humanely euthanize the cats on site. Typically, feral cats are not really adoptable pets, and particularly ones that have been isolated and not used to the public, so it wasn't our intention to try and bring them to the mainland and try and adopt them out, just because we knew that they would likely be euthanized here, and it's just more stress during the whole transport. So that was an option that we considered, but had rejected in the whole analysis. So we put out our draft environmental document, and not surprisingly, we received a lot of public comments. I used to have a cat. I don't have a cat now, but I love cats. A lot of people love cats. Cats are America's favorite pet, right, besides dogs. And there are a lot of people that feel very strongly about cats. And so there was a lot of opposition. We received over 5,000 public comment letters from mostly organized from these feral cat groups like Alley Cat Allies. The Humane Society of the United States was a national organization that opposed the project. We did have support from other groups, other conservation groups that showed support, like the Pacific Seabird Group and Wildlife Society. And in response to we had anticipated that we would receive some controversy for the project. That's kind of just how it goes with these types of removal projects. But in response to that, we initiated some discussions with the Humane Society of the United States and with Best Friends Animal Group, Animal Society, and we tried to figure out where are our areas of common ground and where did we disagree. And they mostly, for example, the Humane Society, they mostly disagreed with our choice of methods, that we wanted to use padded leg hold traps instead of box traps. And there's just some nuances. So we invited them out to San Nicolas Island. This is some folks this is one of the Humane Society's veterinarians, biologists, a couple of their biologists. And we were like, come on out, come to San Nic and let's try your methods. Because they had experience on mainland populations and with trapping, and they felt confident that they could successfully trap feral cats. And so we invited them out there. They were out there, I think, for 3 weeks. And they employed a lot of different types of, or no, I guess it was a 3-month trial. These guys were out there for 3 weeks, but we actually continued to use their methods for 3 months to give it enough time. And we also tested the feasibility that if we caught cats, we would test the feasibility of actually transporting them off island, because not only was the Humane Society interested in these different types of traps, they were actually interested in trying to bring the cats off and establish a mainland sanctuary for these cats, not necessarily to adopt them out, but to have a place that they could kind of live out their life in the long run. So that was part of this trial. They came with all sorts of tricks that they had and tools that they had used previously. And during that, let's go to my next slide. Oh, okay. So during that trial, they were not successful in catching any cats. So not one. So it was, it was. Until you try it, it's like you really can't believe that you couldn't catch cats in these box traps. And even though we had explained it to them, they wanted to try it firsthand. So I think it was, an experience for them. They learned a lot. And we immediately after their field trial, we followed up using the padded leg holds, and we caught 7 right away. And so it was fairly clear that the method that we had proposed was the one that was likely to work out there. But in the whole negotiation of that, they were still interested in taking the cats after we had trapped them. So the final EA, the environmental assessment, we kept our padded leg hold traps as the primary method for trapping the cats. We also wanted to continue to use the use of dogs out there, because dogs, have the unique ability to find animals where maybe it's at such low numbers. You can bring in some dogs and really help find out where your last remaining cats are. So dogs are a very important use in conservation on islands, particularly for when your numbers of your target species get really low, and the dogs can help track where the remaining animals are. The difference was with the final EA, we wrote in there that an approved animal welfare organization could take custody of the cats if they were going to provide an enclosed space in perpetuity. They couldn't just release the cats on the mainland and sort of transfer the problem. And they had to have these very specific requirements for the long-term care of the cats. And then also we had this extensive avoidance and mitigation package particularly for foxes, because we were concerned about foxes getting also caught in the traps. So we wanted to make sure that we were doing as much as possible to reduce time in traps and any potential source of injury for both cats and foxes. So some of our measures for island foxes included avoiding the breeding season. We just did not trap during the breeding season at all. We modified the leg hold trap so that just some things on the trap to make it less prone that the animal would actually hurt themselves in it. And we had this whole trap telemetry system, which I'll talk about. And then we also had a fully equipped veterinary hospital on the island just in case there were any injuries. So this system is basically you have your trap in your field. Once the trap is triggered, it will send a message so that you on your computer can have an alert immediately when an animal's in a trap, so that you're not you can go and, unless it's at the middle of the night or something, you can go and respond right away. And that increased the efficiency of this project just because Sanic is so big and there's so many canyons and areas that it's hard to get to these traps. So this system really helped allowed us to scale up, have more traps in the field at one time, and also just minimize the amount of time an animal would be in a trap. I think our average response time was about 45 minutes. And considering the size of Sanic, that is pretty fast. And then here was our mobile fox hospital that we had out there. It had capabilities to do any sort of surgery or treatment of abrasions or that sort of thing. And then if we had any, we also use this that if any other foxes that we encountered, not associated with our project, but sometimes foxes get hit by cars out there, or there's some other circumstance that they injure themselves, we would bring them here and treat them during the project. So we started the project in June of 2009, and just so you guys get a sense of kind of the operational aspects of these projects, the island was divided up into these zones, and the project was kind of done in a rolling front across the island so that you felt like you were moving sequentially across the island. We had at peak a total of 236 traps out across the island, and again that trap telemetry system allowed us to have that many with the ability to be able to manage it all at once. The traps were checked at first light and throughout the day as we got notification, the 45-minute response time. And then all the traps, no matter if they were sprung or not sprung, were checked every couple days just to make sure that the system was functioning and to also reset the traps to try and bring in animals to those. And then the data was entered in the field on a handheld recorder. And what's kind of neat is you can see we put GPS units on all the staff and trappers, everybody associated with the project, so that you can really see this is a track of all of, or a GPS map of all of their locations. So we can see in real time where our coverage is and where we might be missing. Some of these you just can't, like these are all real steep canyons on the south side of San Nick. So you can kind of go up the main canyon finger, but this is a way for us to, in real time, see how we are progressing with the project. So here's just kind of the overall look at our cat removal. In 2009, the cats actually were at fairly low numbers out there because just the sustained drought probably the cat population was lower. But this is our field trial that we had with the Humane Society of the United States. I mentioned that we went and trapped right after they were complete. We trapped 7 animals right away. And then we waited until after the breeding season for foxes, and we started opening up traps in late June. We had our first big initial pulse in July, and then another pulse in September. And by the time we got into October, November, we were at very few animals. And we actually thought maybe we were pretty done with the project, that given the sustained effort and that many traps out there. And we actually, because our goal now was to remove cats off island, we didn't actually deploy the dogs until much later at the end of the project. So we wanted to make sure to minimize any potential interaction between the dogs and the cats. So this was all just trapping the animals and then removing from the trap and then transporting off island. Here were our captures. Most of the sort of best habitat on San Nick is on the north side. There's lots of little coastal lagoons and areas where the cats can feed also along the beach. The south side is very rugged, not a lot of water out there, but you can see our captures. And we, in total, had over 30,000 trap nights. So if a trap is out in the field for one night, that's considered a trap night. So in total, over the span of that time, we had over 30,000 trap nights. And when we got a cat, we would bring it back to the hospital and just do a workup of it. Folks had to be really careful trying to get the cat out of the trap and transporting it, because just to try and minimize any injury to the cat and also to the handler. This cat is sedated, that's why she's able to do the workout. So they would sedate the cat and take all of its vitals and all that stuff. They were vaccinated prior to leaving the island. And then also we took a genetic sample so that should we ever find cats again on San Nick, we can know that it's actually part of this original population and not just an accidental new introduction to the island. Why we had the cats, we tried to minimize the amount of time that they were held on island before they were taken off island. But some of them we captured were pregnant females, so we had kittens, which the staff really loved, and we immediately tried to start socializing them so that those guys could have a chance of being adopted out. And all of our kittens were adopted out once they came to the mainland, and even actually some of the Navy personnel adopted them. And it was really interesting when we were talking with the Navy folks out there. A lot of old timers out there were like, we don't have cats on this island. We've never seen cats out here. And we're like, well, you want to come see some cats that we actually captured? Because they just never saw it, and folks weren't allowed to feed cats and at the main Nick town there. So we had a lot of curious folks that have been working out there come and see the cats, and we had them. And then the Humane Society, as part of their commitment, they transported the cats off island, and they were flown off island, and they were flown to this facility in Ramona, near San Diego, and they had developed or constructed this whole facility for the San Nick cats. And this is the facility. It's all enclosed, and they try to do enrichment and have a nice large enclosure. The cats obviously can't get out. That was the really important aspect, that the cats, we're going to be there and be there in perpetuity. So that the Humane Society also received some funding from Do Great Good, another organization that contributed to the long-term care of the cats. So we, as I showed that initial map of sort of the timeline, we thought we were pretty done in October, November. We started putting out all these trail cams. You guys might be familiar with these. Hunters use them, or just folks on their property to see what's there. We put out all these Reconyx cameras. We put out 52 of them across the island, and sure enough, we caught a cat on one of them. I'm like, where have you been? And so this was in, I think it was in December, this cat was first identified. And we had multiple pictures of this cat. And it kind of has a little kink in its tail. It was identified as male from the photos. And over the next, basically over the next 6 months or so, because we tried to capture the cat, and it was clearly trap shy, or just had avoided our traps before. So we had been following it. It had been picked up. These are all just camera trap locations. And this is the same individual where they had found, picked him up. He was obviously traveling far and wide, like, where's everybody? Where's all my people? So we ended up, waiting to after, well, we noticed he was kind of congregated in this area, so we saturated more camera traps in that area, and we actually picked up another cat. So then we knew there were two. And so we really concentrated on that area, and we were able to get the two cats. And then, so after that point, then we were fairly confident, besides that one that was kind of hunkered down. That really kind of scared us because we're like, oh, and that one happened to be a pregnant female. And that was one that had just been really in a very tight territory. She was right next to a little water source, and she was not moving, whereas this animal, we were picking them up all over. So after we got those two, then we entered what we called the confirmation phase. And what we did is similar to the project where we had our traps in a rolling front, we did the same thing, but now just with camera traps, with those cameras. And so these are all the locations of the cameras throughout the island. Just the difference is the yellow were stationary, and then so just there throughout the confirmation period, and then the reds were just ones that we had moved after a period of time. So we had very extensive coverage, and we had a really lot of cool pictures from these camera traps of things, beyond cats. Pelicans, we had cormorants taking a walk, we had elephant seals doing some yoga, all sorts of fun things. And then many, many pictures of foxes, and then many thousands pictures of grass blowing, which is a problem. So these poor techs, having to go through thousands of photos and trying to find a feral cat or anything else interesting. So luckily now with these cameras, folks are working on artificial intelligence to do facial recognition or, animal recognition, so that now it's not quite there yet, but we're trying to do it on Santa Cruz Island with skunks and with foxes to try and actually be able to identify individual animals so that you could, start to get a sense of population size just from these camera traps. And then also your camera then only takes a picture of your target species. So say, you only want pictures of foxes, so it's not going to take a picture of, whatever else, a skunk or, so it's just minimizing the amount, or grass blowing in the wind or something like that. So it's kind of cool. That's kind of a new emerging field of wildlife management, and I think it'll help these projects in particular. And part of what we do out there on the islands right now is biosecurity, and that basically is trying to prevent new animals from coming out. So we have these cameras located throughout the islands to try and identify, if a rat accidentally gets introduced, for example. And so having this kind of technology in our biosecurity program would be very helpful as well. Because right now we do have poor volunteers going through many thousands of photos, looking, kind of for a needle in the haystack. So just kind of wrapping up here, our project completion phase, we had 27,000 camera trap nights since the removal of those last two cats. And we also, at that point, brought in dogs to try and clean up and look up any potential scent. Sandvik is extremely windy, so that was another reason why we didn't use the dogs that much, because it ended up not being that effective because the wind would just kind of blow the scent, so the dogs couldn't really get on a hot trail. It just wasn't, it was a difficult place for dogs to work, and without positive reinforcement, the dogs tend to just sort of lose interest and get distracted. So we had done a detection probability model before the end of the project to determine how much would we have to do in this confirmation phase to feel confident that, 99.9% confident that we had removed every last cat. And it had recommended 427 to 1,200 camera nights, and we greatly exceeded that with the 27,000. So we felt that, our confirmation phase was really solid and robust, and we were done with the project. In total, we removed 66 cats and 10 kittens, and then we had some post-project monitoring to look at seabird response. And this is just a lot of text here, but essentially we are seeing positive response of seabirds. We had the first nesting of a pelagic cormorant in 2009. In 2014, we had the highest numbers of Brandt's cormorants nesting out there. We had a new nesting record of Caspian terns on San Nic in 2015. And then one of our rare species, the ashy storm petrel, I'll show you a picture in a minute. We had detections in 2016 and 17. We had these recorders out in the field listening for seabird calls. It's just another way to try and detect seabirds on an island. And they picked up a vocalization of an ashy storm petrel. And just kind of jumping ahead, this year for ashy storm petrels, a total of 48 were recently caught on the island in these mist nets. And we haven't yet found a nest of an ashy storm petrel, but we're pretty sure they're out there. So that's really exciting. Ashies had never been documented before on the island. We had, and then coming back here, we had 2 potential nests of brown pelicans. It wasn't confirmed, so we're kind of loosely putting that out there, but one of the biologists out there thought that he saw 2 nesting brown pelicans. And then we had a first record of airman's gull nesting out there in 2017. And then western gulls, although they're still below their past population levels, their numbers have been increasing out there, so it's encouraging. So we're pleased to see the recovery out there. We continue to think that San Nic will be an important seabird colony, and maybe we'll start to continue to see some of these rare seabirds come. And this is the ashy storm petrel. It's a very rare bird to our area. It only nests on the Farallon Islands, and then in the Channel Islands here, and just into the beginning part of Mexico on the Baja California Islands. So the worldwide population, it's listed as, I think, endangered under IUCN standards, the International Union of Conservation Nature. It's listed as endangered under there. It's not federally listed, but it's a very rare seabird, only found to our area. So we're really excited and encouraged about the potential for these guys to be nesting out on San Nicolas. So just wrap up here, San Nicolas was the largest island that we had a successful feral cat removal without the use of toxicant. That was very poison, essentially. That is a very standard tool that are used on other islands, but we didn't use them here, so we were the first major island to just use trapping. The 5th largest island in the world and the largest in the United States to complete cat eradication. It was a very complex project with the island fox. It makes it really challenging to try and do a project for cats. And the cats are actually bigger than our island fox. So very delicate animal that we had to work with. We did get some injuries of island foxes in the traps that we handled. Interestingly, cats, we had no injuries of the cats in the traps. They're just bigger, their bone structure is a little more robust. So the cats were all fine. Very challenging, to work with military operations, just because on San Nicolas they'll close parts of the island for launches. So if we had traps in an area, we had to make sure all our traps were closed so that we didn't have animals stuck in there for any period of time. So just working with the Navy and all the different partners that use San Nic to make sure that military operations were not impacted, but that we could still, get to every area on the islands, because we had to ensure that we had every last cat. Live removal of cats was very challenging, dealing with a very wild animal like that. And then also just avoiding sensitive areas like some of these marine mammal areas. We wanted to make sure that we didn't have disturbance on. And then finally, just a unique partnership, but this is kind of one of the few examples where we had federal agencies and and state agencies formed this unique partnership with Humane Society of the United States. And it was really great because we came to some very common ground about the importance of doing this kind of project, but we just needed to agree on the way we were going to do it. So in the end, everybody was comfortable with the methods that were used, and we were able to move forward with the project. So I think that's it. My email is at the bottom if anyone has any follow-up questions or wants to talk to me more about any work on the Channel Islands. But does anyone have any questions right now? Yeah.
How do you balance out the predator, like for the hawks and the eagles? Don't they use like the cats or some of those animals to feed on?
Well, we don't have any nesting bald eagles, for example, out there, or golden eagles. They're not present on. So cats weren't really a food source for any of the raptors. We do have peregrine falcons that nest on San Nicolas. I think we have 3 pairs, but those guys only eat other birds. So there wasn't anything that was impacted by not having the cat as part of their prey resource. Cats were really a top predator out there.
When you took the cats away, did the foxes then have more access to food? Were they competing with the cats?
Yes, the cats and the foxes would compete for territories and also for food resources. The foxes on San Nicolas Island actually, after the project, they went through a bit of a dip. Their population went through a bit of a dip, and they're back to more normal levels now. But I think that was largely due to sustained drought. The drought's just been really hard on the foxes. Now that we're seeing more rain, and I bet this year, once we get the numbers from this year, we'll see more pup production just with the good rainfall year. But yes, in the long run, it is going to be a benefit for foxes because there will be more mice available, more lizards, more vegetation, things that they were competing on for food. And then also just territory space.
But what about the nesting? The foxes, the wily fox go after the eggs?
Yeah, so foxes do impact seabirds out there. That's just one of these issues that we'll continue to have out there. They do impact, they will take eggs in particular from seabird nests. Eventually maybe the Navy will cordon off an area, fence off an area that would just be for seabirds, for example. That's an option they could do to try and exclude foxes from that area. But so seabirds will continue to contend with that, but instead of now having 2 sources of predation, now there's just one. So it helps relieve some of the threats to seabirds out there.
You mentioned that some of the birds are caught in mist net.
Mhm.
Something that was introduced for water collection for the island.
So mist net is a way for seabird biologists to try and get the bird in hands. They put up these nets in the middle of the night. They try to not do it during a full moon, right? So the birds just kind of don't see the net. They fly in the net, and it's a way for them to band birds and to do measurements on it. So they'll go out and mist net. Biologists typically will mist net a couple nights in an area where they think they might have seabirds, but they haven't found nests, for example. Or they know they have seabirds there and they want to just start banding some of the birds. So it's a technique that's used in addition to doing things like nest surveys, and also using these audio devices which plays the birds. They'll actually set up a recorder at these mist nights and mist nets and try and draw in the birds and to be able to capture them. So it's just a way for biologists to see what else is there on the island that they may have missed. Because some of these areas on San Nic, wherever these ashies are nesting, assuming they're nesting out there, the ashy storm petrels, it's very hard to find because we haven't found a nest yet. So using the mist nets is another way to confirm that the birds are actually around the island, utilizing the island.
They're taken down when you're...
Yes, yeah, it's only during the night, they're up for maybe 3 to 4 hours, and then they're wrapped up and taken down. It's not a permanent thing.
What was the scent you were using for the cat trap?
I'd have to look it up, some nasty scent. Yeah, I have to look. I mean, they have like, different mixtures and it just smells really bad.
Was it
But,
like a game scent? Or
yeah, like a
cat?
game scent.
So they couldn't use that for the box traps?
They tried. They have tried to use those. Another problem with the box traps, though, is you might just fill all your box traps with foxes because the foxes, we monitor the foxes using box traps. So you have a situation where, too, the foxes have no problem going in those box traps. So you have a lot of traps with foxes in them, and then you're kind of excluding the cats. So they did try and lure, especially the Humane Society folks brought a whole bunch of different types of scents and lures to the box traps. So yes, they do lure the box traps. And with the fox monitoring, they just put a can of cat food in the back of it, and the foxes will go in no problem.
Why do you think the cats were so trap-wise?
I think just because, that is so out of the norm of their natural habitat, and they're just extremely shy. Those ones were just extremely shy. Just not gonna go in something that's small and dark and foreign to them. Whereas the foxes just didn't have that problem, and they had positive reinforcement when they were in there, so they would be willing to go in again and again.
You mentioned the Fairland Islands in
Yeah.
San Francisco.
Mhm.
I heard they're gonna dump like tons of rat poison.
So that project, that's actually a Fish and Wildlife Service project because it's a national wildlife refuge. That project is similar to ones that we've done out here on the Channel Islands, like Anacapa Island. They are proposing to use the exact same techniques that we used here on Anacapa Island, and our Anacapa project was very successful. And the thing with using rodenticides like that is, yes, you can have some short-term impacts. In their case, they're trying to remove a non-native mouse that is impacting the ashy storm petrel, that species I showed you guys recently. And they are proposing to use a helicopter, similar to how we did out here in Anacapa, and disperse this rodenticide onto the island and basically try and achieve complete eradication of the house mouse. I think there's a lot of concern, and rightly so, about using poison in an environment, but this particular rodenticide has been used and studied extensively, and there's a lot that the agency can do to try and minimize non-target impact. For example, on Anacapa, we trapped a bunch of raptors that might get secondary poisoning from picking up a carcass, a rat carcass. You can time it so that a lot of your species aren't there, and a lot of these species are migratory, so they're only there at certain parts of the year. So you try and time your project so that you're avoiding as much impact as possible. The biggest concern with the Farallon project is there's a lot of western gulls that use the island, and they could be at risk for secondary poisoning. The plan, though, is to try and haze those birds off. They've done a lot of study and a lot of work to try and figure out what would be the best way to try and haze off those birds. So, yes, it is using a poison that does have impact, but it's a short-term impact, and you can try and minimize that impact as much as possible. And what you get, though, is in the long run, you're saving species that might otherwise go extinct. And it's one of these things that wildlife conservationists and managers, it's a really hard thing. You don't want to be putting rodenticides out in the environment, but if that's the only way to get rid of rats or non-native mice, then you're kind of willing to accept that short-term hit for a long-term gain. And that's what we've seen at Channel Islands and in islands across the world, where you might have a short-term impact to certain species, but your long-term benefits are just amazing. And on Anacapa, we've seen just an incredible recovery of seabirds post the removal of rats. And a lot of folks are concerned too about the rodenticide getting in the water. But there's been a lot of improvement to the way that this the bait is deployed, where they're trying to really deflect it away from the coast so that it doesn't get into the water. But with Anacapa, for example, we studied the effect of the rodenticide in the water, and it dissipates in a matter of very short time. I don't want to say minutes, but there's no impact to your intertidal zone or to black abalone or any of those potential sensitive resources. It dissipates really quickly. More of the impact is on the ground to anything that could be secondary poisoned, and that really is tried to be minimized. So unfortunately, that project actually just went in front of the Coastal Commission this past week, and that's probably how you heard about it. And there's a lot of need to educate folks about why we would propose to use something like that, and the benefits that we see long term. And unfortunately, right now that project is on hold because there's a lot of concern, and rightly so. But there's these types of methods have been very well studied and shown to be very effective with limited short-term impact, but very substantial long-term gain. So
It's impacted the mountainlands.
yeah, and on the so on the mainland, that's a very different story, and where you have these rodenticides, the rotificum, and others that are having really significant impacts to predators in our region. And it's it's available for commercial use, or commercial and personal use. You can go buy this stuff in Home Depot, and it's being way overused, and it's a real problem. But this is a very different circumstance when we're proposing to use it on an island for conservation purposes, for trying to save species from extinction. It's very different.
In terms of it sounds like this project required a lot of feet on the ground. Were you guys being shipped in or boated in, or were you guys living on site?
Yeah, so we hired an NGO called Island Conservation, and they do eradication projects all over the world. They had a team of 10, I think they're all guys. We didn't have any girls in the field team, but they had a team of 10 folks that basically lived on San Nic. The transport to San Nic is by plane, so it's actually fairly easy to get on and off. It's like a 20-minute flight from Point Mugu. But those guys, we refurbished an old fire station, old fire building out there that they used as their sort of headquarters, and they were there for several months. And some of them would go off and on to just kind of regroup, but they were there solidly throughout the duration of the project. And they typically those field crews, they will bring a cook with them, so that because they're in the field all day, and then they have someone back at the station kind of managing all that and all the equipment, and will cook for them. But it's a team of biologists and trappers basically. They need to know the biology and kind of the sensitivities, but these guys are really just skilled trappers and have skills to know how to set these traps and handle animals and that sort of thing. A really great organization that we work with. They helped us on the Anacapa rat project as well.
In your opinion, which is worse, cats or rats?
Oh boy, they're both bad. I don't know. I think it just depends. I mean, they're both really bad for islands. And even non-native mice too, we can see a lot of impacts. I mean, cats can cause a lot of damage, but rats can too. On Anacapa, we were seeing over 80% predation of seabird eggs in the sea caves from rats. So they're both extremely difficult predators to work with. So we hope there's rats on San Miguel still. We hope to remove those one day. It is very challenging because there's a fox on San Miguel, so that project would be very difficult to figure out how to do it without really impacting the fox. And then there's cats and rats on San Clemente, and there's a little bit of everything on Catalina, including bison, and which folks would love to see. Some folks would love to see the bison be removed too, just because it's having a lot of impact to the native vegetation and rare plant species out there. But yeah, there's still work to be done on those islands, though. Trying to remove cats and rats from Catalina, for example, would be extremely difficult. And folks can still bring over pets to Catalina, so it's got its own unique set of circumstances there.
What's the status of Santa Barbara?
Santa Barbara Island, in terms of open.
Alien predators.
Santa Barbara, they used to have cats. Those were removed, I think, in the 80s. And they used to have rabbits out there that also were very impactful. Those are gone. The Park Service removed those. Right now, Santa Barbara doesn't have any no invasive mammals. The biggest thing for Santa Barbara Island is the invasive plants. So, ice plant, cheeseweed. There's a lot of invasive plants that have. I mean, largely because the island was so impacted from cats and sheep, and then, thank you. So yeah, the vegetation just hasn't recovered. But fortunately, there's no rats or.
What about vegetation on St. Nate? Is that being restored?
Yes, yeah, and actually I wanted to put up a slide about that. I forgot that. San Nick, they have a really great natural resource program out there that they're trying to restore native habitat. They have a nursery on site and actually if anyone's interested in volunteering out there, Channel Islands Restoration brings out regular volunteers to work out on San Nick on the vegetation project. So it's a neat way to be able to get out to the island. But they are doing habitat restoration now.
Does the Navy fund these restoration projects?
Yeah, well, for this project, for the San Nick cats, that was funded by this Montrose restoration program. The Navy obviously provided a ton of support, in-kind support, and but the Navy is funding these habitat restoration programs. So sometimes the Navy is able to get more funding for threatened and endangered species because it's more of a requirement. But we've seen, a lot of great partnership with the Navy to try and do just above and beyond just listed species. So they're doing good things. Yeah.
Are there any more questions? All right, on behalf of everyone here, the city, and the Hueneme Historical Society Museum, we'd like to present you with this certificate.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And you also get 2 pins,
All right.
writing pins, and
Oh, wow.
this very nice little
Oh, thank you so much.
handwritten gift card.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you guys for having me and coming to hear about it. Yes, get my email. Yes.
Absolutely, I gotcha.
Yeah, and if you guys, have any questions on the Channel Islands, feel free to contact me anytime. And
Oh, yes, and our tradition here is to collect a little donation and to support our services here. If you got $1, that'd be great. And we'll look forward to bringing you back.
yes, you figure out the next, what you want to learn about. Yes.
What do you want to skim us on?
Well,
Brian
give me a
went last
topic.
year.
What's that?
Brian went last year. He went over a couple times to help out.
Yeah, that's
Oh, good.
really awesome.
Oh yeah, after this talk, yes, he came out to Anacapa and was helping out there. That's really great.
Yeah, he said, and he went out again.
Oh, that's excellent. Okay, excellent.
So you impressed him so much.
Oh, well, I'm glad, there's always great things to do out there, so yeah, if folks want to get involved, there's a whole volunteer program for the islands and a lot of great opportunities.
How do you get access to voluntary programs?
So I would contact Channel Islands Restoration.
Channel Islands Restoration.
Yeah, do you have anything I could write it down on for you?
I think I can remember.
Okay, they have a whole volunteer program out there, and
There you go, guys.
Bringing out folks to San Nick to help work on working the nursery or.
I can go out there and look for birds.
Yeah.
Land.
They do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe next year.
He's a 2-year-old.
Yeah. Right here for you.
That's crazy.